For the first route of extracting Harmala alkaloids, you are of course going to need some Syrian Rue. We are going to begin by weighing this piece of cloth and later on crushing the Syrian Rue in a coffee grinder. When you crush up the seeds, the surface area is increased and the extraction becomes much more efficient. The seed batches were powderized for about 30 seconds and in the end we were left with a fine powder which was dumped onto the piece of cloth. I'm not able to fit that many seeds into the coffee grinder and therefore the process was repeated again and again. The piece of cloth was closed using a zip tie and we weighed it again. In total we ended up with 597.4 grams of crushed up seeds. Unfortunately, these seeds are not going to fit into a normal extractor, but fortunately my extractor is not normal. This piece of equipment is an absolute unit. It can fit 2 liters of material and it can only be described as massive. If you want to clean this thing, you can fit your entire arm in there. A piece of copper was added to the bottom to act as a separator, and if you are not going to add this, you are not going to get an efficient extraction. The liquid in the extractor is going to flow down into the flask way too slowly if you don't have the separator. And there you go, we are nearly finished. The only thing left to do is to add the extraction solvent. I chose to use isopropanol, but ethanol should also be fine. About 4 liters of solvent were added and you can already see some green stuff in the solvent. This is a mixture of Harmala Alkaloids. They look nice under normal lights, but later on I'll show you an even cooler property. I am sure that you have noticed that this is not a soxide extractor but a different type of extractor, and you are correct. You have to drain the extraction tube manually, and even though this may not be as convenient as a soxide, it works just as fine. One of the cool properties of these alkaloids is that they fluoresce nicely under UV light. Below the extractor we have this massive 6 liter round bottom flask, and above it we have a big condenser. As a reference to the sheer size of this apparatus, here's my hand. The condenser was flushed with water, heating and stirring were turned on, and we only had to wait for the solvent to start boiling. I ended up using the biggest stirfish in stock because I've never done anything on this scale. The solvent vapor condenses up here, and when the solvent is boiling, it does not carry over any alkaloids which we already extracted. Another nice effect is that the solvent condensing up here is hot, and hot solvent dissolves more alkaloids than cold solvent. You can see that this is true because of the darker green color, and when we light it up with a UV light, it's even more fluorescent. On top of the extractor you can see these beautiful clouds of Harmala alkaloids, but only under UV lights. Without UV lights you can't see them. With the extractor being full, we are now going to drain it for the first time. For that, you open the valve and you wait for all of the isopropanol to drain. You can also partially open the drain, so it's enough isopropanol in the extractor that you don't have to supervise it all the time, but letting it fill up and draining it manually is more efficient. The major alkaloids in Syrian Rue are harmaline and harmine. Harmaline fluoresces with a green color and harmine has more of a blue tint. Now that it's dark outside, the alkaloids look even more interesting under UV light. This looks like it does not belong onto this planet. But when you look at the boiling flask under UV light, it's even more mesmerizing. Besides that, every draining cycle looked like it was out of a crime scene. The heating mantle can end up drawing 800 watts of power just to generate heat. If you're wondering what we are using for the cooling water, I'm going to show it to you. We are using a 200 liter barrel full of water. The extraction ran for 30 hours and in the end the water in the barrel was 25 degrees Celsius warmer than what we started with. In the beginning the color of the liquid at the bottom was rather dark, and as the extraction cycles continued, the color got lighter and lighter. At some point after about 50 extraction cycles, not all of the light was immediately absorbed by the liquid and I decided to stop. I assumed that I worked cleanly enough not to have gotten anything onto my hands, but I was proven wrong. Under UV lights my hands were glowing brightly, and shout out to my FBI agent because I've just become glowy too. After all of that extracting, you can now see the liquid in the round bottom flask. It's a dark green and in the sun it looks slightly bluish. I set up a simple distillation in order to get rid of most of the isopropanol. We ended up boiling off 2 out of 4 liters. Next I did what every good chemist should do, and I transferred the liquid to a 10 liter canister. I then forgot about it for a few weeks because I needed the reactor for a different reaction. It ended up not being a few weeks, not a few months, it ended up being more than half a year that I didn't touch the canister. And I guess that during this time a lot of it oxidized away. I cut open the canister and still took a look at it under UV light, and it still glowed. I ended up adding water in the hope that something precipitated out, but it didn't really want to precipitate. I got this brown mush, which still fluoresced under UV light, but even after I tried filtering it, not a lot remained behind. And I used a filter with a pretty fine pore size, so if we got anything, it should have stayed behind. I am not going to try this method again, it was worth a try, nobody has done it in this way ever before, so yay, we did something new. And in the future I am going to try a different method, which is definitely going to work. So until then, and I hope that you learn from my failures.